Hello, and welcome to the Hopkinton Public Library's Take and Make. If you signed up for our Take and Make in our event calendar, you will be able to pick up materials for the Take and Make this week. We will contact you to confirm your registration. If you were not able to sign up on our event calendar, you can still participate by picking up a few basic materials at your local craft store. We will be having more Take and Makes in the future, so be sure to check our calendar for more events. We've linked to our calendar in the video's description. This month, we'll be making a hand-bound pamphlet. Making pamphlets like these is the first step in learning to make hand-bound books. These can get very fancy, but binding a pamphlet is a simple and good way to dip your toes in. Let's take a look at our materials. First, we have some scrapbooking paper. This is a nice patterned paper that will become the cover of our book. Next, we have a skein of embroidery thread. Since I'm nice and I like all of you, I've made sure that the paper and thread in each kit match. This is normal embroidery thread that we've worked with before. You will notice that each thread is made up of smaller strands, but we're going to use it whole instead of splitting it up. We also have a bookbinding needle in a slip of paper. This needle is bigger and thicker than most needles you've used for sewing. This is so that it can handle the stress of being pushed through multiple layers of paper. You can also get curved bookbinding needles if you start doing larger books. There are a few sheets of normal printer paper. You can get fancy paper to put into the interiors of your book, but unless I'm making a wedding book or something really fancy, I prefer to spend my money on nice cover paper. And last but not least, you've got your cheat sheet. There are some additional materials you will want for this craft. If you're comfortable with very sharp objects, you can use a craft knife and cutting mat. Otherwise, you'll want a pair of scissors. You'll also want a ruler and a pencil. And in addition, you'll want either a small awl or a push pin. If you don't have either of those things, you can also use your needle if you're careful. Teens, there are a few sharp objects in this kit. And there are a few more sharp objects that we suggest using, so we encourage you to do the kit while an adult is home. Or, if your adult has signed up for an adult kit, you can do it together with them. Great, let's get started. My first step is to prepare my paper. I'm going to do this by cutting it in half the short way, or the hamburger way. I have a craft knife, a metal ruler, and a cutting mat, so I'm going to do it like this, but you can also mark the paper with a ruler and pencil and then cut it with scissors. We want it to be as precise as possible, so I suggest taking your time and doing this part carefully. If the halves aren't equal, your book will turn out looking a little haywire. Once the paper is cut, I'm going to fold it in half. I like to get a really good crease in mine, so I'm going to use this folder or creaser to really make sure that fold sticks. These are also used in origami. Mine is actually cow bone, but you can get vegan plastic ones. You can also use the edge of a pen or the handle of your scissors to put a crease in the paper. Just make sure that whatever you're using doesn't leave a smear of color along the edge of your paper. Now that the paper is all folded, I'm going to stack them together. This bundle of papers folded together like this is called a signature. Most books you've handled will have had multiple signatures sewn or glued together. You can actually see the signatures in a hardbound book by looking at the top of the spine. Multi-signature bindings are intermediate level binding though, so we're going to stick with just the one signature for today. Next, I'll prepare my cover. I'm going to take the fancy cover paper and measure and cut out a piece that's the same size as my white pieces of paper. That's 5.5 by 8.5 inches. You can do this with the knife and cutting mat or with a ruler, pencil, and scissors, whatever you feel comfortable with. Then I'm going to fold the cover paper in half also, so that it matches my white paper. When I stack it with the signature, you may have a tiny gap of white paper coming out of the outside edge, but that's okay. This overflow will decrease once the pamphlet is securely sewn together. And now for the last bit before we start sewing. We need to mark our holes. In order for the binding to look even, I'm going to measure and mark where I want my holes to go. There are going to be 5 holes total. I like to take my innermost signature page out and work with it flat. It's important to make the marks right on the fold so that they're easy to see when I'm sewing. The easiest way to explain where to place the marks is to start with the middle hole and measure outward in either direction. My middle hole is going to be 2.75 or 2 3/4 inches from both the top and the bottom, right smack dab in the middle. Once I have my middle hole done, I'll use that to mark 2 holes to either side of it along the spine. These holes will be 1-inch increments away from the middle hole. Once I've got 5 holes marked and they look even, I'll slide this piece of paper back into my signature, making sure that the marks are visible when the book is open. We're not quite done preparing our signature though. Now we need to punch holes so that we can easily thread our needle through the spine. We'll do this with a small awl, a push pin, or if you're careful, you can do it with your needle. I'll lay the book on its back and tilt the first half of the book up at a 90-degree angle so that they're standing straight up from the table. I should be able to see my pencil marks in the crease there. Using my sharp implement of choice, I'll punch a hole at each marker, being careful to punch all the way through the pieces and the cover. That being said, I'll try to keep the hole as small as possible, so I'm not going to slide my awl all the way up to the handle. I'm just going to push it through far enough that the cover has a teeny hole in it. This is an important step to do carefully, because if you're sloppy punching your holes, the book can end up off kilter, or your thread can end up running down the front or back cover of the book instead of sitting nicely along the spine. Once I've punched all 5 of my holes, I'm ready to prepare for sewing. In order to start sewing, I'll need to prepare my needle and thread. I'm going to cut a piece of thread that is about 3 times as long as the spine of my book. The amount of thread you need will vary depending on how many signatures you are stitching together and the pattern of your stitching, but we're doing a simple stitch and just 1 signature, so 3 times the height of your book should be more than enough. Once I have my thread cut, I'll thread my needle, making sure to leave 1 short tail and 1 long tail. And unlike much of the sewing you may have done, we are not going to put a knot in the end of our thread. My first stitch is going to be in the middle hole, and it's going to go from the inside of the book to the outside. I'll pull my needle through and pull the thread through until there's about a 3-inch tail left on the inside of the book. Don't worry, we'll get back to it later. My second stitch is going to be up 1 hole, and it's going to go into the book. Then I'll go out of the book from the topmost hole. Now it's time for us to double back and go down the book. I'll go in the second hole to the top, skip the middle hole and go out the second to the bottom hole. Then in the bottom hole, out the second to the bottom hole. And finally back in the middle hole. Our sewing is complete. Now, I know that was a lot of ins and outs and tops and bottoms. So on your cheat sheet, I have included the top link there for you. The additional 5-hole binding instruction has a really nice diagram that shows the ins and outs and where your thread is supposed to go. So if me reading off to you the ins and outs that you need to do was confusing, I would suggest going and taking a look at that diagram because it is really very helpful. All right, so once we've got that all sorted, we need to tie off our ends. I have 2 ends here that are on the inside of the book coming from the middle hole. I also have a long thread that stretches across this section of the spine on the inside of the book. I'm going to arrange my 2 end threads so that there's one tail on each side of the thread that stretches along the spine. Then I'm going to bring the tails together over that thread and tie them off. You can use a simple square knot for this. Once it's tied, I'll trim the ends. Now your book is complete. That's it for today. We hope you enjoyed our Take and Make. Keep an eye out for our next Take and Make in our event calendar. Links to our social media feeds are in the description. Don't forget to like and follow us for more fun crafts, as well as book suggestions, community news, and more. We have links to more bookbinding resources in the description, including that nice diagram that I mentioned. And last but not least, you can use the link to our calendar to find our next Take and Make, as well as lots of other fun events for adults, teens, and kids. Thank you for joining us!